The library door opens with a soft creak. There, amidst books worth fortunes, is his son, Ethan, eyes shining with admiration. And beside him, the maid, Caitlin. But she isn't cleaning. With an elegance he had never noticed, she points to an ancient star map, explaining constellations with the wisdom of an astronomer. The snow fell relentlessly outside the small Roxbury apartment window as Caitlin Johnson stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 3 tests, 3 identical results. Positive. At 21, in her 3rd year as an astrophysics scholarship student at MIT, this wasn't part of her meticulously planned future. Yet, as her fingers traced the tiny plus sign, she felt not fear, but a strange, nervous anticipation about sharing the news with James Harrison IV. Even his name carried the weight of generations of Boston aristocracy. They had been dating for 8 months, a relationship that began with a chance encounter in the university library where he had approached her, fascinated by the complex quantum propulsion theories she was studying. "You understand all this?" he had asked, gesturing at her equations with genuine admiration in his voice. Caitlin smiled at the memory as she wrapped her threadbare cardigan tighter around herself. The heating in her apartment was unreliable at best, another reminder of the vast difference between her world and his. While she had grown up in Dorchester, the daughter of a primary school teacher and a bus driver who had both perished in an accident when she was 16, James had never known anything but privilege. CEO of Harrison Holdings at just 29, he commanded a financial empire estimated in billions, inherited from a family whose roots in Boston predated the Revolution. The buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts. A text from James. "Outside. Come down." Caitlin's heart quickened as she grabbed her coat. This wasn't how she had planned to tell him. She had imagined dinner, perhaps candles. But maybe this was better. Spontaneous. Honest. She hurried down the creaking stairs of her building, her smile blooming despite the bitter December cold. The gleaming black Range Rover stood out starkly against the dingy street. James didn't like to linger in her neighborhood. "Too many unsavory elements," he had once commented, seemingly forgetting that she was from these very streets. "I have amazing news," she said breathlessly as she slid into the heated leather interior, the warmth enveloping her immediately. She noticed the change in his expression instantly, the slight hardening around his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. "What is it?" His voice was measured, controlled. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words hanging between them in the suddenly thick air of the luxury vehicle. James said nothing for a long moment. Then, without a word, he put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. "James?" Caitlin asked, confusion replacing her earlier excitement. "We'll talk at your place, somewhere private," he said, his voice oddly flat. The 3-minute drive felt eternal. When they arrived, he parked but left the engine running, a silent statement that he wouldn't be staying long. Inside her apartment, James remained standing, refusing the offered seat on her worn sofa. His eyes swept over the small space she kept meticulously clean and organized, her academic awards carefully framed on the wall, her only decorations. "You really thought I would put a Harrison in your womb?" he finally asked, his voice carrying a calculated contempt that struck her like a physical blow. "James, I don't understand. We talked about a future." "Pillow talk, Caitlin. Temporary fun." He reached into his cashmere coat and tossed a thick envelope onto her coffee table. "There's $10,000 in there. Get rid of it. I'll pay, but I won't be dragged down by someone who only knows poverty." "Dragged down?" Caitlin repeated, her voice barely audible as the room seemed to tilt around her. "My family has expectations. Harrison Holdings has expectations." His eyes traveled again over her modest apartment. A girl from Dorchester in second-hand clothes isn't part of that picture. He glanced at the framed scholarship certificate on her wall with disdain. "It was fun while it lasted, but I always knew this would end. I just didn't expect you to be careless enough to get pregnant." When tears began to well in her eyes, he rolled his own. Unnecessary drama. Handle it and move on. As he reached the door, his parting words fell like a sentence. Go back to your place, Caitlin. This fantasy that you could belong in my world is over. The door closed behind him with finality, leaving Caitlin standing alone in the middle of her apartment, the envelope untouched on the table. She remained frozen until her legs gave way, collapsing onto the cold floor where she curled around her still flat stomach, sobbing until dawn broke over Boston's skyline. The envelope remained on her table, untouched. The following months unfolded with brutal efficiency. Determined to keep her baby, Caitlin faced the subtle prejudice of academia. Her faculty advisor suggested discreetly that a pause in your studies would be sensible. Former colleagues who had once admired her brilliance now whispered about just another statistic when they thought she couldn't hear. To survive, she took 3 jobs: research assistant during the day, waitress at night, and mathematics tutor on weekends. She slept barely 4 hours nightly, studying in the pre-dawn darkness to maintain her scholarship, refusing to let her pregnancy become the end of her academic dreams. In her 5th month of pregnancy, during a practical lab session, the lack of sleep and proper nutrition finally caught up with her. Caitlin collapsed beside a particle accelerator, her fall breaking a protective barrier and narrowly missing critical equipment. When she regained consciousness in the university infirmary, Professor Rachel Goldstein, a renowned astrophysicist and one of MIT's most respected faculty members, was sitting beside her bed. "Johnson, are you trying to kill yourself?" the older woman asked bluntly, her sharp eyes taking in Caitlin's exhausted appearance. "I need to finish this semester, Professor. I can't lose my scholarship," Caitlin replied, attempting to sit up. "And your solution is to work 3 jobs while pregnant?" Goldstein's tone was incredulous. "What happened to the father?" The simple question broke something in Caitlin. After months of stoic determination, she found herself explaining everything to this woman she knew only as an intimidating academic figure: James's cruel rejection, the isolation, her fear of failing before she'd even begun. When she finished, Goldstein sat in contemplative silence for several moments. "My apartment has a spare bedroom," she finally said. "Move in there until you finish your doctorate." "I can't accept charity, Professor," Caitlin replied immediately, her pride still intact despite everything. "It's not charity, it's investment." Goldstein's voice softened unexpectedly. "Your paper on quantum propulsion is the most brilliant thing I've read in decades. I won't let a Harrison destroy a mind like yours." With Goldstein's help, Caitlin secured a paid internship at NASA that accommodated her pregnancy. On a sweltering July morning in 2008, after 19 hours of labor, Ethan Johnson was born. With penetrating green eyes exactly like his father's, but with the fierce determination that was all his mother's. That night, holding her newborn son in the quiet hospital room, Caitlin made a promise that would shape the next 14 years of their lives. "One day, Ethan," she whispered to the sleeping infant, "we'll show James Harrison that we were the best thing he ever threw away. And when that day comes, it won't be about revenge, but because we've built something greater than he could ever imagine." In the stillness of that hospital room, cradling her son against her heart, Caitlin couldn't know that 14 years later, she would indeed stand before James Harrison, not as a supplicant, but as a woman who had transformed his cruel rejection into an empire that would eclipse generations of Harrison wealth and power. The promise Caitlin whispered to her newborn son became her North Star, guiding every decision through the grueling years that followed. The first 2 years after Ethan's birth tested the limits of human endurance. Her days stretched like elastic bands ready to snap, beginning at 5 in the morning and often ending well past midnight. In the small bedroom of Professor Goldstein's Cambridge apartment, Caitlin created a sanctuary for Ethan. The walls, once bare, gradually transformed into a tapestry of hand-drawn constellations, quantum equations, and photographs marking Ethan's milestones. A second-hand crib stood beneath a mobile of the solar system that Caitlin had crafted from wire and painted styrofoam. 3 hours, she mumbled, glancing at the clock as she rocked 3-month-old Ethan at 3 in the morning. Dark circles framed her eyes like permanent bruises, but her hand never stopped moving across the notebook balanced on her knee. Differential equations filled the margins while Ethan finally drifted back to sleep against her chest. Professor Goldstein often found them like this. Caitlin simultaneously mothering and studying, refusing to let either role suffer. "You're going to collapse if you continue this pace," she warned one morning, finding Caitlin asleep at the kitchen table, her forehead resting on an open textbook while Ethan gurgled in his carrier beside her. "I don't have the luxury of rest," Caitlin replied, straightening up and immediately reaching for her coffee. "My scholarship review is next month. If my GPA drops even slightly, I lose everything." The daily routine was merciless. Up at 5 to feed Ethan and prepare bottles for the day. Drop him with Mrs. Fernandez, an elderly neighbor who watched him for a nominal fee, by 7:30. Sprint across campus to her research assistant position in the quantum physics lab. Attend classes until 4, then rush to pick up Ethan before hurrying to her tutoring sessions, the baby strapped to her chest as she explained calculus to struggling undergraduates. Weekends meant waitressing at a diner near Harvard Square, where she balanced trays of pancakes while Ethan slept in a makeshift bed in the staff room, the manager looking the other way out of pity for the determined young mother. Sleep became a luxury, snatched in 90-minute increments between Ethan's feedings and her studies. 4 hours became her nightly maximum, with caffeine and sheer will powering her through the rest. 6 months into this brutal schedule, disaster struck during a departmental seminar. Professor Harrison, no relation to James, though the name still made her flinch, publicly dismantled her research proposal on alternative propulsion methods. "This reads like science fiction fantasies from an overextended mind," he announced to the packed lecture hall, his voice dripping with dismissive authority. "Perhaps motherhood has compromised your scientific rigor, Ms. Johnson." The room fell silent. Caitlin felt heat rise to her face as 30 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't jeopardize her standing, Professor Goldstein's voice cut through the tension. "That's interesting coming from you, Harrison," she said, rising from her seat in the back row. "Considering Johnson's fantasies solve the quantum tunneling problem your team has failed to address for the past decade, perhaps it's not motherhood compromising rigor, but privilege fostering complacency." Later in the women's restroom, Caitlin broke down, tears streaming silently down her face as she splashed cold water on her cheeks. "I can't show weakness," she whispered, staring at her reflection. "They're all waiting for me to fail." "Then don't give them the satisfaction," Goldstein replied simply, handing her a paper towel. "Brilliance is the best revenge." By Ethan's first birthday, Caitlin had established a precarious balance. Her thesis work was progressing despite the skepticism of faculty members who viewed her single motherhood as a deficit rather than the demonstration of exceptional strength it truly was. The turning point came unexpectedly when Ethan was nearly 2 years old. Having recently learned to walk, he toddled across Caitlin's study area directly to the whiteboard where she had been working on a particularly stubborn equation for days. "Ma," he babbled, reaching up with chubby fingers to touch precisely the spot where she had made a critical error in her calculations. The correction was immediately obvious to her trained eye. "Rachel!" she called out, excitement cutting through her perpetual exhaustion. "Did you see that? He found it! The error no one else caught!" Professor Goldstein observed from the doorway with quiet amazement. Like mother, like son, he sees patterns intuitively. From that moment, Caitlin began to notice Ethan's extraordinary capacity for mathematical concepts. While other toddlers played with blocks to build towers, Ethan arranged them in sequential patterns. Where other children scribbled chaotically, he drew circular motions that eerily resembled orbital patterns. His intelligence became another source of strength during the most challenging days. a reminder that the sacrifices were creating a foundation for something extraordinary. Caitlin's thesis defense came when Ethan was 2.5. The lecture hall was unexpectedly full, with representatives from NASA, SpaceX, and several defense contractors in attendance, all drawn by whispers of her revolutionary approach to spacecraft propulsion systems. Her presentation was flawless, her responses to questions incisive and confident. As the committee unanimously approved her doctorate, a sense of vindication washed over her. She had done it, maintained her scholarship, earned her PhD, and raised a thriving child, all while being told repeatedly it was impossible. The aftermath brought a flood of job offers. The most aggressive came from Aero Systems Incorporated, a major defense contractor whose CEO personally called to recruit her. "We'll double any other offer, Doctor. Johnson," he promised smoothly, "your work on plasma acceleration is exactly what our propulsion division needs." The offer letter arrived the next day, a starting salary of $120,000, plus relocation assistance and comprehensive benefits. For someone who had been counting pennies for diapers just days before, the figure was staggering. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Caitlin spread the contract across her small desk and began reading the fine print. Her excitement gradually gave way to unease as she discovered the clauses buried in legal jargon. All intellectual property would belong exclusively to the corporation. Research directions would require executive approval. Publications would need security clearance. She would be well paid, but effectively muzzled. Glancing toward Ethan's sleeping form, his chest rising and falling peacefully beneath his rocket ship pajamas, Caitlin made her decision. She tore the contract in half, then quarters, then eighths. "I won't build your future with their scraps," she whispered to her sleeping son. "We deserve more than being someone else's asset." The next morning, she knocked on Professor Goldstein's office door, Ethan balanced on her hip. "I've turned down Aero Systems," she announced without preamble. Goldstein looked up from her computer, eyebrows raised. That was a very generous offer. "It was golden handcuffs," Caitlin replied. "I want to start my own company, develop my propulsion system independently, maintain control of the patents." She hesitated. "Is that crazy with a toddler and no capital?" Goldstein leaned back in her chair, studying the young woman before her, the same one who had arrived in her office 3 years earlier, pregnant and desperate, now standing tall with a doctorate and a clear vision. "It's crazy to think small when you have a mind and heart as big as yours," she said finally, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Besides, I might know a few angel investors who'd be interested in backing the next Einstein of propulsion physics." As she folded her PhD diploma later that evening, placing it carefully in a protective sleeve, Caitlin had no way of knowing that 10 years later, those same executives who had tried to hire her for $120,000 annually would be begging for 10 minutes of her time, willing to pay millions for the innovations they had once dismissed as science fiction fantasies. The $50,000 from Professor Goldstein felt simultaneously like an astronomical sum and frighteningly inadequate as Caitlin signed the lease on a dilapidated laboratory space in East Cambridge. The building had once housed textile manufacturing before falling into disrepair, with broken windows that whistled during winter storms and electrical wiring that sparked ominously when overloaded. "Are you sure about this place?" Goldstein asked, eyeing a suspicious water stain spreading across one corner of the ceiling. "MIT would give you incubator space as an alum." "With strings attached," Caitlin replied, running her hand along a dusty workbench. "Here, I make my own rules." She didn't mention the other crucial advantage. The building's security guard had been persuaded with a small monthly bonus to overlook the fact that the new tenant occasionally stayed overnight. 3-year-old Ethan circled the vast space with wide eyes. "Is this our new house, Mommy?" "No, sweetheart. This is where Mommy will build spaceships," she answered, watching him explore with boundless curiosity. "We'll still have our apartment." The words felt hollow. She had already given notice on their modest rental, knowing she couldn't afford both the lab space and housing. That first night, after the landlord left and darkness fell, Caitlin unfolded a camping mattress behind a row of storage cabinets, creating a hidden sleeping nook. She laid out Ethan's dinosaur sleeping bag atop it and set up a small battery-powered lamp. "Adventure time," she whispered, helping Ethan into his pajamas. "We're going to camp here tonight while our new apartment gets ready." The lie tasted bitter, but she masked it with a smile as she read him a bedtime story about stars and distant planets. When his breathing deepened into sleep, Caitlin crept back to the workbenches and unpacked her equipment by the harsh glow of a single work light. The prototype components for her revolutionary propulsion system, salvaged, borrowed, and occasionally dumpster-dived from MIT's discarded equipment, looked pathetically inadequate against the vastness of her ambition. The morning ritual developed quickly. Wake before dawn, fold and hide the mattress behind equipment crates, transform their mini refrigerator into what appeared to be monitoring equipment by draping it with cables and indicators. Ethan learned to speak in whispers during daylight hours and to disappear behind the storage cabinets whenever the door buzzer sounded. "Bath time," Caitlin announced one evening, heating water in an electric kettle and pouring it carefully into a large sink that once served textile workers. She had scrubbed it obsessively before deeming it clean enough for Ethan. "With bubbles?" he asked hopefully. "Not tonight, astronaut," she replied, helping him undress in the chilly air. "But I'll tell you about the Horsehead Nebula while you wash." As steam rose around them, Caitlin spun tales of cosmic dust and star formation, watching her son's eyes light up with wonder despite their circumstances. These moments sustained her through the grueling days of trial and error, each failed iteration of her propulsion system burning through her limited funding at an alarming rate. 6 months into the venture, Caitlin scheduled her first demonstration for potential investors. She had prepared meticulously, calculating every variable, rehearsing her presentation until Ethan could recite portions of it from memory. "The efficiency gain is remarkable," she explained to the 3 venture capitalists seated before her prototype. 40% less fuel consumption with 20% greater thrust capability. The oldest investor peered at her over his glasses. "Interesting concept, Dr. Johnson, but extraordinarily risky. And your personal situation, single motherhood, raises concerns about your availability and focus." Another chimed in. "Perhaps with a technical co-founder, a seasoned male engineer, we might reconsider the investment risk profile." Caitlin maintained her professional smile until they left. Then, alone in the vast space, she kicked a metal trash can with such force it crashed against the wall, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. "Bad men?" Ethan asked from his hiding spot, emerging cautiously. "Not bad," Caitlin sighed, gathering him into her arms. "Just limited in their vision." As their funds dwindled, Caitlin took on remote consulting work during Ethan's naps, stretching their resources to maintain both the lab and their scientific progress. Now 4 years old, Ethan had developed an uncanny ability to entertain himself amid the laboratory equipment, creating elaborate space games with discarded components. One devastating afternoon, after months of incremental progress, Caitlin's latest prototype catastrophically failed during a critical test. A power surge caused the containment field to collapse, resulting in an electrical fire that destroyed the central control module, representing 3 months of work and nearly all their remaining capital. When the smoke cleared and the fire extinguisher's contents settled like artificial snow across her workbench, Caitlin slid to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and allowed herself 5 minutes of absolute despair. Tears streamed silently down her face as she calculated their remaining runway. 2 weeks before complete insolvency. Small arms wrapped around her shoulders. "Don't cry, Mommy," Ethan whispered. "We can build a better one. What about using that shiny piece over there?" Caitlin looked up to find her son pointing at a component she had previously dismissed as incompatible. "That won't work with the existing configuration, buddy," she explained gently. But what if it goes here instead? Ethan moved to the partially melted prototype and pointed to an arrangement she hadn't considered. That evening, while Ethan slept, an eviction notice arrived. They were 3 weeks behind on rent. Caitlin tucked the paper into her pocket without allowing her expression to change as she stirred their dinner. Boxed macaroni and cheese, the third time that week. "Astronaut food again," she announced cheerfully, setting Ethan's plastic space shuttle plate before him. After dinner, Caitlin made one final, desperate attempt to secure funding. She had arranged a presentation for Boston's most prestigious investment group, known for backing high-risk, high-reward technologies. Her presentation was flawless, her data compelling, but the response remained the same. "The technology shows promise," admitted the lead partner. "But perhaps you need a co-founder with more industry experience to inspire confidence. A woman alone, especially with childcare responsibilities." The unfinished sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Caitlin returned to the lab exhausted and defeated. She found Ethan kneeling amidst components from her failed prototype, rearranging them into what appeared to be a miniature version of the propulsion system depicted in his picture books. "I'm making a rocket like in the books," he explained proudly, connecting wires with surprising dexterity for his small hands. Caitlin knelt beside him, about to gently explain that his creation couldn't possibly function when something about the configuration caught her attention. The seemingly random arrangement of components created a circuit pathway she hadn't considered, one that might potentially resolve the containment field instability that had plagued her designs. "Ethan," she whispered, "stay exactly like that. Don't move anything." She spent the entire night testing the configuration, modifying it slightly to accommodate proper scale and safety parameters. By dawn, the hastily reconstructed prototype demonstrated a stable reaction, something she had failed to achieve despite months of methodical attempts. "Rachel," she said breathlessly into her phone, not caring that it was barely 5 in the morning. "It works! The motor works with 40% less fuel." That night, Caitlin and Ethan celebrated with a dance party in the empty laboratory. Spinning beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, sharing a large pizza, a rare extravagance, they gazed upward through the broken skylight at stars twinkling in the cold night. "We're going there someday," Ethan declared with absolute certainty, pointing upward. "Yes," Caitlin agreed, holding him close. "Yes, we are." The prototype that, born from the play of a 4-year-old and the perseverance of a desperate mother, would, in just 5 years, become the technology that revolutionized the aerospace industry and placed Caitlin Johnson on the list of America's most powerful women. The prototype born from Ethan's innocent play would soon attract attention from quarters Caitlin had never imagined. On a brisk autumn morning, 3 months after their breakthrough, the laboratory door opened to reveal 4 individuals in crisp military uniforms, their posture rigid as they surveyed the makeshift workspace. "Dr. Johnson?" A woman with colonel's insignia stepped forward, her skeptical gaze taking in the patched equipment and improvised testing apparatus. "I'm Colonel Rivera, Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects. We've reviewed your patent application for the modified ion propulsion system." Caitlin straightened her posture, acutely aware of her worn jeans and the coffee stain on her MIT sweatshirt. Behind her, Ethan peeked out from his designated safe space behind a row of equipment cabinets. "Yes, that's me," she confirmed, extending her hand. "Welcome to Celestial Innovations." The delegation exchanged dubious glances at the grandiose name that contrasted sharply with the dilapidated surroundings. Colonel Rivera consulted her tablet. "Your claims about efficiency improvements seem ambitious. We'd like a demonstration." Caitlin's heart raced. "Of course. I'll need about 20 minutes to prepare the prototype." As the officials waited, speaking in hushed tones, Caitlin knelt beside Ethan. "Remember our special game? I need you to be super quiet while Mommy shows these people our rocket technology." He nodded solemnly, his green eyes, so like his father's, wide with understanding beyond his years. "Will they help us go to the stars?" he whispered. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe they will." The demonstration exceeded even Caitlin's expectations. The modified propulsion system achieved stable operation with precisely the efficiency parameters she had claimed in her patent filing. The Colonel's skepticism gradually transformed into undisguised interest as readings confirmed a 43% reduction in fuel consumption with no loss of thrust capability. "Remarkable," murmured the technical specialist accompanying the Colonel. "The implications for satellite deployment alone could revolutionize our capabilities." 2 weeks later, Caitlin's hands trembled as she signed the preliminary contract with the Department of Defense. $3 million for further development and testing of her propulsion system for potential military satellite applications. The sum, modest by defense industry standards, represented astronomical wealth to someone who had been calculating how to stretch ramen packages for maximum nutrition. That evening, Caitlin and Ethan stood before a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, just 3 blocks from a park with actual swings and a slide. "Is this really ours?" Ethan asked, his small hand clutching hers tightly as she unlocked the door. "Yes, buddy. This is our new home." Caitlin flipped on the lights to reveal freshly painted walls and clean if basic furnishings she had purchased secondhand but had professionally cleaned. Ethan bolted immediately to explore, his excitement reaching fever pitch when he discovered his own bedroom. "Mommy, I have a whole room!" he shouted, spinning in circles before stopping abruptly. "Can I have a bed shaped like a spaceship?" Caitlin laughed, the sound unfamiliar even to her own ears after months of stress. "Yes, astronaut. I think we can manage that." With stable funding secured, Caitlin could finally focus on building Celestial Innovations into a legitimate company. Her first task was assembling a team that shared her vision. She placed particular emphasis on recruiting talented engineers who, like herself, had been overlooked by traditional aerospace corporations. "I know what it's like to have your potential underestimated," she explained during an interview with Maria Chen, a brilliant propulsion specialist who had been passed over repeatedly for promotion at a major defense contractor. "At Celestial, we value innovation over pedigree." Within 6 months, Caitlin had assembled a core team of 12 engineers and technicians, each bringing unique expertise to the rapidly evolving propulsion system. They moved operations to a proper laboratory facility, clean, well-equipped, and most importantly, designed exclusively for research rather than covert living arrangements. On her desk in the new facility, beside cutting-edge computing equipment and technical journals, sat a single photograph. Newborn Ethan in her arms at the hospital, his tiny fist curled around her finger. A daily reminder of why failure was not an option. As the company grew, balancing motherhood with her role as CEO became increasingly challenging. Ethan, now 7, had been accepted into a specialized program for gifted children, where his mathematical abilities and scientific intuition flourished in an environment that could finally challenge him. The schedule was relentless. Caitlin routinely worked 18-hour days, arriving home long after Ethan had fallen asleep under the watchful eye of Mrs. Fernandez, who had relocated with them to provide after-school care. The guilt weighed heavily, especially when she missed important school events. One particularly difficult evening, Caitlin arrived home at 9:30, having missed Ethan's first science presentation. She found him still awake, sitting cross-legged on his rocket-shaped bed, working on complex orbital calculations that would challenge undergraduate physics students. "I'm so sorry I missed your presentation," she said, sitting beside him, her voice thick with regret. Ethan looked up, his expression startlingly mature. "It's okay, Mommy. I know you're building rockets so we can reach the stars someday." His understanding only intensified her guilt, but also reinforced her determination. Every exhausting day brought them closer to security and stability, things she had never known growing up and was desperate to provide for her son. The defining moment for Celestial Innovations came 18 months after the initial defense contract. The final prototype of their commercial-grade propulsion system was scheduled for its critical full-duration test, a make-or-break moment that would determine whether they could move forward with commercial applications beyond military use. The entire team gathered in the control room, tension palpable as Caitlin initiated the countdown sequence. Propulsion test commencing in 10, 9, 8. Ethan, allowed to attend this historic moment, squeezed her hand tightly as the numbers approached 0. The system ignited precisely on schedule. Monitors displayed performance metrics that exceeded even their optimistic projections. As the test reached its conclusion without a single anomaly, the control room erupted in cheers and embraces. Hours later, after the celebration had dispersed and team members had departed, Caitlin remained alone in her office. For the first time since James had walked out of her apartment and her life, she allowed herself to cry openly, not from despair or exhaustion, but from overwhelming relief and pride. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had created something revolutionary. The following week, Celestial Innovations held its first official board meeting. Professor Goldstein, serving as chairperson, opened with a simple statement. "What, Doctor? Johnson has achieved in 3 years would have taken established aerospace companies a decade." Investors who had previously dismissed Caitlin's vision now clamored for the opportunity to participate in the next funding round. The same venture capitalist who had suggested she needed a male co-founder to inspire confidence now sent daily emails requesting a meeting. That evening, Caitlin sat at her computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard before decisively typing the address of Harrison Holdings. She ordered a simple business card to be delivered. Dr. Caitlin Johnson, CEO, Celestial Innovations, with a brief handwritten note attached. "Thank you for the motivation. Some people need to be abandoned to discover their true strength." Later, she and Ethan celebrated their own private victory with a simple dinner at their kitchen table, toasting with grape juice in wine glasses. "To our future among the stars," she said, clinking her glass against his. "To us," Ethan replied with a smile that illuminated the room more brightly than any star could. As she sent that single business card to the man who had once deemed her insignificant, Caitlin couldn't know that in just 4 years, James Harrison would watch helplessly as Celestial Innovations was announced as the fastest-growing startup in aerospace industry history. The single business card Caitlin sent to James Harrison marked a turning point, a small acknowledgement to herself that the past no longer defined her future. What she couldn't have anticipated was how dramatically that future would unfold over the next 2 years. On a clear morning in March 2015, Caitlin stood in the control center of Vandenberg Air Force Base, her heart pounding as the countdown for Celestial's first commercial satellite launch reached its final seconds. Beside her, 9-year-old Ethan clutched her hand, his face a mirror of her own nervous excitement. 3, 2, 1, ignition, announced the launch director. The rocket rose majestically from the launch pad, riding a column of flame into the crystalline California sky. The control room fell silent as everyone held their breath through the critical first-stage separation. When telemetry confirmed a perfect deployment, the room erupted. Caitlin pulled Ethan into a tight embrace as tears streamed silently down her face. This moment represented everything they had fought for: validation of sleepless nights, makeshift laboratories, and uncompromising vision. The satellite carrying Celestial's revolutionary propulsion system would demonstrate to the world that their technology could deliver the same performance as competitors at 40% lower cost. "We did it, Mom," Ethan whispered, his green eyes shining with pride. "No, you did it," she replied softly. "Your configuration solved the containment field problem. This is as much yours as mine." Congratulatory calls flooded in as news of the successful launch spread throughout the aerospace industry. By evening, Caitlin's phone was ringing constantly with potential clients eager to schedule meetings. Within 6 months of that historic launch, Celestial Innovations had grown from 12 employees to over 80. By the end of the year, they would reach 200, necessitating a move to expansive new headquarters in Cambridge, a gleaming glass building that stood in stark contrast to the dilapidated laboratory where they had begun. The new facility featured state-of-the-art research equipment, collaborative workspaces, and, at Caitlin's insistence, a fully equipped educational laboratory dedicated to teaching underprivileged children about aerospace engineering. "Remember where we came from," she reminded her executive team during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Our success means nothing if we don't create pathways for others." As the company flourished, Caitlin's public profile rose accordingly. Her first magazine cover, for Tech Innovators Quarterly, featured her standing before a massive testing apparatus, arms crossed confidently over her lab coat. The photographer had tried repeatedly to convince her to wear more makeup and a more feminine outfit. "I want to talk about the technology, not about me," she had insisted firmly. "Photograph me as I am or not at all." The resulting image, a brilliant black woman commanding advanced technology with uncompromising confidence, became iconic in the industry, plastered across university engineering departments as inspiration for a new generation of scientists who had rarely seen themselves represented in aerospace leadership. For Ethan, his mother's growing fame created a complex new reality. Enrolled in the prestigious Brighton Academy, he initially found himself isolated, known primarily as the Rocket Woman's son, rather than for his own remarkable abilities. "They think I only got in because you're famous now," he confided one evening as they sat in their newly purchased home, a modest colonial in a good school district that Caitlin had chosen over more ostentatious options. "Then show them why you belong there," she replied, helping him with an advanced calculus problem. "Let your work speak for itself." Within a semester, Ethan had done exactly that, astonishing teachers with his intuitive understanding of physics and mathematics. His science fair project on theoretical terraforming techniques won not only the school competition but the regional championship, earning him respect independent of his mother's achievements. Their new home, while comfortable, reflected Caitlin's persistent frugality despite her rapidly increasing wealth. The most expensive feature was a small observatory in the backyard, equipped with a research-grade telescope, a gift for Ethan's 9th birthday. There, mother and son often spent evenings tracking celestial objects and discussing theoretical physics, their shared passion creating a bond that transcended ordinary parent-child relationships. Despite her newfound financial security, Caitlin maintained habits formed during years of scarcity. She still compared prices at the grocery store, bought clothes on sale, and maintained a meticulous household budget. Her executive assistant once found her reusing paper clips from a stack of documents. "Dr. Johnson, you realize you're worth over $30 million now, right?" the assistant had commented with amusement. "Old habits," Caitlin had replied with a shrug. "When you've worried about affording diapers, you never quite lose the instinct to conserve." As Celestial approached its first billion-dollar valuation, pressure mounted from investors eager to capitalize on their success. During a particularly tense board meeting, the representative from Apex Ventures pushed aggressively for accelerated expansion. "We could grow 300% in 18 months if we divert resources from long-term research to immediate commercialization," he argued, pointing to projected revenue charts. "The market is primed for rapid exploitation." Caitlin's response was unequivocal. "I didn't build this company for the next quarterly report. I built it for the next generation." She gestured toward the laboratory visible through the boardroom's glass wall. "Our Mars propulsion project might not generate revenue for 5 years, but when it does, it will transform human space exploration forever. That's the mission. If you want quick returns, perhaps cryptocurrency would be a better investment for you." The room fell silent. Even Professor Goldstein raised an eyebrow at the directness of the rebuke. Yet no one challenged her further. Caitlin's track record had earned her the authority to define Celestial's path. The real challenge to her carefully constructed world came unexpectedly after a keynote address at the International Aerospace Conference. As she exited the stage to enthusiastic applause, a man in a press badge intercepted her path. "Dr. Johnson, Tom Reynolds from Innovation Chronicle. I'm working on a profile piece about you." His smile seemed professional, but his eyes held a predatory gleam. "Readers are fascinated by your personal story. Single mother to space mogul. I'm particularly interested in your son's father. Why the secrecy? The public wants to know." Caitlin maintained her composure. "My work speaks for itself, Mr. Reynolds. My personal life is not relevant to Celestial's innovations." "With respect, Dr. Johnson, you've become a role model. People want the complete picture. If you won't comment, I'll need to pursue other sources." The implied threat lingered in the air as she walked away, her outward calm masking internal turmoil. That evening, Caitlin arrived home to find Ethan in the backyard, meticulously constructing a scale model of a space station, his small hands confidently connecting structural elements as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. She watched him for a moment, this extraordinary child who carried James Harrison's eyes, but her own determination and brilliance. For years, she had protected him from the full truth, offering only that his father wasn't ready for a family. Now, at 9, he deserved more. "Ethan," she said softly, sitting beside him in the grass, "we need to talk about your father." Together they walked to the observatory where the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. Seated beneath the dome, Caitlin showed him a photograph she had kept hidden away. James Harrison at a charity gala, captured by Boston Magazine. His name is James Harrison IV. He comes from a wealthy, established Boston family. She kept her voice neutral, determined not to color the facts with her own pain. "When I told him I was pregnant with you, he decided he didn't want us in his life. He thought we weren't worthy of his name or his time." Ethan studied the photograph with scientific detachment, searching for similarities to his own features. "He has my eyes," he observed quietly. "Yes," Caitlin acknowledged, "but everything else, your mind, your heart, your determination, that's all you." Ethan remained thoughtful, processing the information with remarkable composure. "So it's been just you and me against the world all this time?" he finally asked. "Yes," she admitted, "just us." He handed the photograph back to her with a smile that illuminated his entire face. "Then I think we're winning, Mom." That starlit night, sharing the truth with her son, Caitlin couldn't predict that in just 3 years, her company would patent a technology that would transform space exploration and elevate the Johnson name far above the Harrison legacy in both value and global recognition. That starlit conversation with Ethan marked a turning point in their relationship, one built on honesty rather than protective omissions. As they walked back to the house that night, hand in hand beneath the constellations, Caitlin felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The truth, once spoken, lost some of its power to hurt. What neither of them could have anticipated was how dramatically their lives would transform in the following years, propelled by a breakthrough that would redefine humanity's approach to space exploration. The laboratories of Celestial Innovations hummed with anticipation on a crisp morning in January 2018. Engineers and scientists gathered around a sealed testing chamber, their faces reflecting equal measures of hope and skepticism. Inside the chamber, the culmination of 3 years of relentless research, a revolutionary ionic propulsion system, prepared for its 72-hour continuous operation test. "Initiating primary sequence," announced Dr. Maria Chen, now Celestial's Chief Technology Officer. "All parameters nominal." Caitlin stood slightly apart from the team, her posture betraying the tension she felt. This particular technology had consumed her for years, countless nights spent refining calculations, rejecting conventional wisdom, pursuing a solution others deemed impossible. If successful, It would reduce travel time to Mars by half, fundamentally altering the economics and feasibility of deep space exploration. Hour by hour, the system maintained optimal function. When the 72-hour mark was finally reached, the control room erupted in cheers and embraces. Caitlin accepted congratulations with quiet dignity, but inside, she felt something akin to religious awe. They had done it, created something that would change humanity's relationship with the cosmos. 2 months later, Caitlin found herself testifying before Congress about the implications of their breakthrough. Seated before the Science and Technology Committee, she articulated a vision of accessible space exploration that transcended national boundaries. The technology we've developed at Celestial Innovations doesn't merely represent an incremental improvement, she explained to the assembled legislators. It fundamentally alters our capacity to explore our solar system. A journey to Mars that previously required 9 months can now be accomplished in under 5, with significant reductions in radiation exposure for astronauts. The formal industry presentation that followed a week later transformed Celestial's market position overnight. In the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, before an audience that included the CEOs of every major aerospace and technology company, Caitlin unveiled their achievement. "What you're about to witness represents a paradigm shift in propulsion technology," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The demonstration that followed, a scale model achieving velocities previously thought impossible for ion propulsion, left the room in stunned silence before erupting into sustained applause. Caitlin could see the calculations happening behind the eyes of the industry titans in the front row. The commercial implications, the strategic advantages, the profit potential. The aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. Before Caitlin had even returned to her hotel room, her phone was inundated with meeting requests. By morning, a literal queue of executives had formed outside her temporary office at Celestial's New York satellite location. "Google is offering $800 million for exclusive licensing rights," her chief financial officer reported breathlessly. "Amazon just countered with $1.2 billion. SpaceX wants a strategic partnership with Equity Exchange." The offers escalated daily. 2 weeks after the presentation, during an emergency board meeting, the representative from Sequoia Capital leaned forward intently. "The Google offer has reached $2 billion for full acquisition," he said, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. "As your fiduciary advisors, we strongly recommend consideration. This represents a 48 times return on initial investment." Caitlin studied the proposal without touching it, aware of all eyes on her. The room waited for her response with collective breath held. "I didn't build this company to sell it," she finally stated, her voice calm but resolute. "I built it to transform how humanity explores space. Selling now would cap our potential at exactly the moment we've proven our vision viable." The statement should have ended the discussion, yet the pressure continued. "Dr. Johnson," pressed another board member, $2 billion would secure your family's future for generations. Your son—" "My son," Caitlin interrupted with unexpected sharpness, "is watching to see if his mother stands by her principles or abandons them at the first substantial offer. What lesson would you have me teach him?" The silence that followed contained its own answer. While Caitlin navigated the corporate implications of their breakthrough, Ethan was carving his own impressive path. Now 12, he had published his first peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of Aerospace Engineering, an extraordinary achievement that made him the youngest published author in the publication's history. His theoretical work on self-regenerating habitation systems for long-duration space missions had caught the attention of senior NASA officials. In his personal laboratory atop the Celestial headquarters, Ethan demonstrated his prototype to visiting MIT professors, explaining complex bioengineering concepts with the confidence of a seasoned researcher. The mycelia network acts as both structural reinforcement and air purification, he explained, pointing to a living matrix that formed the walls of his scale model. The system can heal itself using ambient carbon dioxide as a primary resource, Caitlin observed from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. This brilliant mind might never have had the opportunity to flourish had she accepted James's directive to get rid of it all those years ago. The thought strengthened her resolve to maintain control of Celestial's future. As 2018 progressed, Celestial Innovations expanded internationally, opening research facilities in Tokyo and Berlin. The new corporate headquarters in Manhattan occupied the top 15 floors of a sleek skyscraper on Madison Avenue, with a reception area dominated by a striking portrait of Caitlin and Ethan, mother and son, builders of a new space age. It was in this office on a crisp autumn morning that Caitlin's assistant placed the Wall Street Journal on her desk with a particular article circled in red: Harrison Holdings faces 30% market value decline amid innovation drought. Caitlin skimmed the piece with professional detachment. James Harrison was described as reluctant to adapt to changing market conditions and losing ground to more agile innovators. The financial analysis was brutal. Harrison Holdings had failed to diversify beyond traditional investment vehicles, clinging to outdated models while technology-focused competitors surged ahead. The phone on her desk buzzed. "Dr. Johnson, there's a Jonathan Wyatt from Harrison Holdings on line 1. He says it's regarding potential strategic opportunities." Caitlin allowed herself a moment of private reflection before answering. The company that had once seemed so powerful, the empire whose heir had deemed her unworthy, now sought alliance with what she had built from nothing. "Mr. Wyatt," she greeted, her voice professional and measured, "how can Celestial Innovations assist Harrison Holdings today?" The conversation was brief and polite. Wyatt delicately probed the possibility of a partnership, suggesting areas of mutual benefit, without directly acknowledging his company's declining position. "While I appreciate the interest," Caitlin concluded, "our innovation philosophy seems fundamentally incompatible with Harrison Holdings' traditional approach. I wish you success in your transitions." That evening, over dinner with Professor Goldstein, now a trusted friend as well as board chair, Caitlin mentioned the call casually. "Harrison Holdings reaching out?" "That's unexpected," Goldstein observed, studying Caitlin's expression. "Do you feel any satisfaction seeing his company struggle?" Caitlin considered the question carefully. "Truthfully? I've built something too significant to waste energy on vindication. Success isn't about proving James Harrison wrong, it's about proving myself right." As she calmly declined the approach from Harrison Holdings, Caitlin couldn't have imagined that in less than 4 years she would stand face to face with James, not as a supplicant, but as the woman who could either save or destroy his family's century-old legacy with a single decision. Caitlin's words to Professor Goldstein echoed in her mind for days after their dinner. Success wasn't about proving James Harrison wrong, it was about proving herself right. This philosophy had guided her for over a decade, transforming personal pain into professional purpose. What she hadn't anticipated was how prominently her son would feature in that success story. On a brilliant spring morning in Boston, 14-year-old Ethan Johnson stood confidently on the stage of Symphony Hall, accepting the National Youth Science Award for his groundbreaking work on self-regenerating space habitats. The auditorium, filled with the country's most distinguished scientists and educators, fell silent as this remarkable teenager addressed them with the poise and articulation of someone twice his age. "The challenges of extended space missions require thinking beyond traditional engineering solutions," Ethan explained, gesturing toward the holographic display of his design. "By incorporating mycelia networks as both structural components and bioregenerators, we can create living systems that heal themselves using resources already present in the spacecraft environment." From her seat in the front row, Caitlin watched with a pride so intense it felt almost painful. His bearing, his intelligence, his quiet confidence, all cultivated despite beginning life under the shadow of rejection. As applause thundered through the hall, Reporters surged forward, microphones extended eagerly. "Ethan, how does it feel following your mother's scientific footsteps?" called out a journalist from Scientific American. Ethan smiled, his green eyes, so disconcertingly like James's, sparkling with intelligence. "I'm not following my mother's footsteps," he replied thoughtfully. "I'm creating my own path, but with her moral compass as my guide." The quote appeared in dozens of publications the next day, alongside photographs of mother and son, the new scientific dynasty that had emerged from seemingly nowhere to revolutionize humanity's relationship with space. Back at Celestial's Manhattan headquarters, Ethan had his own laboratory occupying the entire 62nd floor. Unlike the sterile environments typical of corporate research facilities, this space reflected the mind that inhabited it. Organized chaos with three-dimensional models hanging from the ceiling, walls covered with equations, and state-of-the-art equipment humming quietly throughout the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city sprawling below, a constant reminder of how far they had come from that dilapidated laboratory in Cambridge. Late one evening, Caitlin entered to find Ethan hunched over his tablet, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. "Everything okay with the new prototype?" she asked, setting down a tray with his favorite chai tea. Ethan quickly switched screens, but not before Caitlin glimpsed what he had been studying: financial news about Harrison Holdings, alongside photographs of James Harrison at recent corporate events. "Just curious," he admitted, abandoning the pretense when he saw her raised eyebrow. "I've been researching him for a while, trying to understand." Caitlin sat beside her son, realizing this moment had been inevitable. Ethan's scientific mind naturally sought to investigate unknowns, and James represented the greatest unknown in his life. "You have questions about him," she acknowledged. "That's natural, and I'm here to answer honestly." Ethan nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "Why has he never tried to contact me? Does he know who I am now? What we've accomplished?" The questions tumbled out, revealing the wounded child beneath the scientific prodigy. "What did I do wrong?" Caitlin's heart constricted. "You did nothing wrong, Ethan. Nothing." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Some people are incapable of seeing beyond their own prejudices and social limitations. James Harrison couldn't see past my background, my color, my financial situation. He couldn't imagine that a child with half my DNA could possibly enhance his precious family legacy." Ethan studied the photograph on his tablet, his eyes tracing the features that mirrored his own. "His eyes are exactly like mine," he observed quietly. "Do you think he ever thinks about me? Wonders what happened?" The question hung in the air, loaded with 14 years of absence. "I don't know, Ethan," Caitlin answered, determined to offer honesty rather than comforting lies. "I only know that the loss was entirely his. He missed watching you take your first steps, speak your first words, solve your first equation. He missed seeing the extraordinary person you've become." Celebrations at Brighton Academy erupted the following week when Ethan was accepted into a special research program at MIT, an unprecedented honor for a 14-year-old. His classmates, who had long since moved beyond seeing him as merely the Rocket Woman's son, organized a surprise party complete with a cake decorated like a space station. The school's announcement caught media attention, with reporters gathering outside the Johnson home the following morning. "Ethan, how does it feel being called the next Einstein by Scientific American?" shouted a reporter as they navigated from their car to the front door. "Inaccurate," Ethan called back with a grin. "Einstein wasn't interested in space habitation systems." Inside, away from the cameras, Caitlin's assistant waited with news that would alter their carefully constructed equilibrium. "Dr. Johnson, congratulations on your selection for the Innovator of the Year award at the Science and Technology Gala," she began, handing over the formal invitation embossed with gold leaf. "And Ethan has been chosen for the Youth Scientific Excellence Award. It's the first time a mother and son have been honored in the same year. Caitlin smiled, accepting the invitation. Please send our formal acceptance. We'll need to prepare speeches. The assistant hesitated, her expression betraying discomfort. There's something else you should know. This year's gala has Harrison Holdings as its principal sponsor. James Harrison will be hosting the event. The room fell silent. Caitlin's face revealed nothing, but her hand tightened imperceptibly around the invitation. After 15 years, the man who had dismissed her as unworthy would be presenting her with an award celebrating her extraordinary achievements. I see, she said finally, her voice steady. Please have legal confirm our attendance and schedule a fitting for the Chanel dress we reserved for special occasions. After the assistant departed, Ethan emerged from his room having overheard the conversation. So I'm finally going to meet my biological father, he said, his tone carefully neutral. It appears so, Caitlin confirmed, watching her son's reaction closely. The Harrison Holdings, isn't that the traditional investment firm that keeps declining partnership offers from Celestial? Ethan asked, his analytical mind immediately making connections. Yes, Caitlin replied, maintaining a neutral tone. An old company with old methods. That evening, Ethan retreated to his room, ostensibly to work on his MIT research proposal, though Caitlin suspected he was processing the impending meeting with James. She respected his privacy, understanding that some emotional equations needed to be solved independently. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, Caitlin gazed at the glittering Manhattan skyline, a view that represented everything she had built since that devastating night in her Roxbury apartment. 15 years ago, she had vowed to prove her worth. Now, fate offered the perfect opportunity, not for revenge but to demonstrate that she had transcended the power of his rejection. As mother and son contemplated the stars that night from their separate vantage points, James Harrison remained awake in his Beacon Hill mansion, unaware that the family financial empire built over 5 generations was about to be eclipsed by the nascent legacy of a boy who carried only his mother's surname. James Harrison remained awake in his Beacon Hill mansion, unaware that his world was about to collide with the past he had so callously discarded. Across the city, Caitlin and Ethan began preparing for an encounter 15 years in the making, one that would finally bring 3 lives full circle. The exclusive Chanel boutique on Fifth Avenue fell silent as Caitlin Johnson stepped from the dressing room. The black dress, elegantly cut with architectural precision, transformed her already striking presence into something almost regal. Reflections of her image multiplied across strategically placed mirrors, each angle confirming what the master stylist already knew. "This dress was made for you, Doctor." "Johnson," the woman said, adjusting the hemline with practiced fingers. "It communicates power and sophistication perfectly." Caitlin studied her reflection, remembering the frightened young woman from Roxbury who once wore second-hand clothes to university classes. "And resilience," she added quietly. "It needs to communicate resilience." The stylist nodded, understanding immediately. The strength in the structure, the unyielding fabric, yes, resilience is embedded in every stitch. Across town, Ethan fidgeted uncomfortably as the tailor measured him for his first tuxedo, pins held carefully between pursed lips as he marked adjustments. "Do we really need all this formality?" Ethan asked, looking to his mother with a raised eyebrow. "Couldn't I just wear my regular suit?" Caitlin smiled, watching her son's reflection. "Sometimes we wear different types of armor, Ethan. This particular armor shows we belong anywhere we choose to be." She straightened his collar. "Even in spaces where people once told us we didn't belong." Later that afternoon, Caitlin sat in the familiar office of Dr. Elena Rivera, the therapist who had helped her navigate the complex emotional landscape of single motherhood and corporate leadership for the past decade. "How are you feeling about seeing James again?" Dr. Rivera asked directly, noting Caitlin's unusually calm demeanor. "It's strange," Caitlin admitted, surprising herself with the realization. "I expected anger, perhaps even anxiety, but what I feel is primarily curiosity. How could someone discard their own child so completely? How will he react seeing what he threw away? It's almost like a scientific observation now. And Ethan, how is he processing this? With remarkable maturity, Caitlin replied. He's approaching it like one of his experiments, gathering data, preparing for multiple outcomes. Sometimes I forget he's only 14. That evening, Ethan paced their living room, practicing his acceptance speech with methodical precision. And I must acknowledge that none of this would have been possible without the guidance and support of Dr. Caitlin Johnson, who has been both mother and father, mentor and friend. Caitlin looked up from her tablet. The speech is perfect, Ethan, but remember, this isn't about him. It's about celebrating your work, your achievement, your future. Don't let his presence or his absence from your life define this moment. Ethan nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. I know, Mom. I'm not adding these references to make him feel guilty. I'm including them because they're true. Meanwhile, in the executive suite of Harrison Holdings, James Harrison spilled coffee across his imported desk as his assistant handed him the final list of honorees for the gala. Is something wrong, Mr. Harrison? The young woman asked, watching her normally composed boss frantically dab at the spreading liquid. No, nothing, he managed, but his eyes remained fixed on the names printed on the elegant cardstock. Caitlin Johnson, Ethan Johnson. After dismissing his assistant, James turned to his computer, fingers trembling slightly as he typed Caitlin's name into the search bar. Dozens of articles appeared instantly. Space Revolution Pioneer, The Woman Reshaping Aerospace, Celestial Innovations CEO valued at $4 billion. He clicked on images, his breath catching as Caitlin's face filled the screen. The awkward scholarship student had transformed into a poised, confident woman whose eyes now held wisdom rather than vulnerability. Then, beside her in many photos, a young man with startlingly familiar features, the same jawline James saw in his own mirror each morning, the same penetrating green eyes that had characterized Harrison men for generations. Dear God, he whispered, recognition washing over him like ice water. He reached for his phone, dialing his attorney's private number despite the late hour. I need information on potential legal exposure, he said without preamble when the lawyer answered. A situation from 15 years ago might become public. What kind of situation? The attorney asked cautiously. A child, a son who would now be 14. I denied paternity, essentially. Offered money to end the pregnancy. The silence on the line stretched uncomfortably before the attorney responded. You explicitly renounced parental rights? Yes, in no uncertain terms. Then legally, she can't make any claims against you now. The statute of limitations for establishing paternity in Massachusetts would have expired. Does she appear to need financial support? James glanced back at his screen, where Caitlin's estimated net worth, over $300 million, was prominently displayed in a Forbes profile. No, he answered hollowly. She doesn't need anything from me. In their Manhattan penthouse, Caitlin found Ethan on the rooftop terrace, adjusting his telescope toward the night sky. The lights of the city created a glowing halo around his silhouette as he calculated coordinates with practiced precision. Jupiter's moons are particularly visible tonight, he said without looking up. Want to see? Caitlin stepped beside him, accepting the offered eyepiece. Through the powerful lens, the gas giant appeared as a perfect disk, its famous red spot just visible with tiny pinpricks of light, the Galilean moons, arranged in an elegant line. Beautiful, she murmured. 400 million miles away, yet we can see them so clearly. Distance is relative, Ethan replied, the statement carrying more weight than astronomy alone could explain. Mom, whatever happens tomorrow night, I want you to know something. Caitlin turned to face her son, noting how the starlight accentuated the features he had inherited from James and how irrelevant those inherited traits had become compared to the person he had grown to be. I'm proud to be your son, he continued. "Just yours. His DNA might be in me, but everything that matters, everything I am, comes from you." She embraced him tightly, this extraordinary being she had raised alone. "We made it, didn't we? Against everything." "We more than made it," Ethan replied with quiet confidence. "We redefined the game entirely." As mother and son contemplated the stars on the eve of the gala, James Harrison remained awake in his Beacon Hill mansion, rehearsing introductions and explanations that would never sound adequate, unaware that the empire his family had built over 5 generations was about to be eclipsed by the nascent legacy of a boy who carried only his mother's surname. The evening before the gala, both Caitlin and Ethan had slept poorly, though neither admitted it to the other. As their private car glided toward the Plaza Hotel, Manhattan's skyline glittered against the night sky like a constellation brought to Earth. Caitlin adjusted the diamond pendant at her throat, her one indulgence for the evening, while Ethan straightened his bow tie for the 5th time. "Remember," she said softly as the car slowed before the historic building, "tonight is about celebrating achievement, not confronting ghosts." "I know, Mom," Ethan replied, his composure remarkable for a 14-year-old about to face the father who had rejected his very existence. "But I can't help wondering if he'll recognize me." The answer awaited them beyond the plaza's gilded entrance, where photographers clustered like eager astronomers tracking a rare celestial event. Camera flashes erupted as they emerged from the vehicle, Dr. Caitlin Johnson in her impeccable Chanel, the fabric gleaming like a black hole capturing light, and Ethan beside her, already taller than his mother, his bearing suggesting a maturity beyond his years. "Dr. Johnson, over here! Ethan, look this way! Celestial's power duo!" The crimson carpet leading into the hotel became their first stage of the evening, each step carrying them closer to the inevitable encounter. Inside, the grand ballroom had been transformed into a celestial panorama, with subtle lighting creating the impression of stars overhead and scale models of famous spacecraft suspended from the ceiling. Across the room, unaware of their arrival, James Harrison stood on the small stage, adjusting his notes at the podium. As the principal sponsor, he would open the evening ceremonies with a speech about innovation and tradition, concepts that had become increasingly contradictory in his own business practices. "Ladies and gentlemen," began the Master of Ceremonies, "please take your seats. We're honored to have Mr. James Harrison IV, CEO of Harrison Holdings, open tonight's celebration of scientific excellence." The crowd settled as James approached the microphone with practiced confidence. At 45, he remained handsome despite the first traces of gray at his temples, his bespoke tuxedo emphasizing the athletic physique he maintained through expensive personal trainers. "The Harrison Holdings has supported innovation for 5 generations, he began smoothly, his gaze sweeping across the gathered scientific and business elite. "Our family has witnessed the transformation of America from the Industrial Revolution through the digital age and now into the era of space exploration." His voice faltered mid-sentence, as his scanning gaze suddenly locked on a face in the audience. For a moment he looked as though he had seen a ghost. Perhaps in a way he had. The frightened young woman whose dreams he had dismissed so callously had vanished, replaced by a poised, successful woman whose name was now synonymous with aerospace innovation. James took a hasty sip of water, his composure visibly shaken. We understand that true progress requires both vision and practical application," he continued, stumbling over words that had flowed smoothly during rehearsal. Seated at a front table, Caitlin maintained a professional smile, her eyes meeting his with perfect composure. Beside her, Ethan observed the man who had contributed half his DNA with scientific detachment, cataloging similarities and differences with clinical precision. James struggled through the remainder of his speech, his usual confidence evaporating under the steady gaze of the woman he had once deemed unworthy. When he finally returned to his seat, A light sheen of perspiration had formed on his forehead despite the ballroom's perfect climate control. The evening progressed through dinner and preliminary awards until the moment Caitlin had both anticipated and dreaded arrived. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the recipient of this year's Innovator of the Year Award, Dr. Caitlin Johnson, CEO of Celestial Innovations. The applause was thunderous as Caitlin rose from her seat, accepting a quick, supportive squeeze of her hand from Ethan before ascending to the stage. Under the spotlights, her presence commanded the vast room. The contrast between the uncertain scholarship student and this confident industry titan could not have been more pronounced. "Thank you for this recognition," she began, her voice strong and clear. "When I started Celestial Innovations, many said that a black woman without family connections would never revolutionize the aerospace industry." Her gaze swept deliberately across the audience, pausing momentarily on James. A flicker of recognition passed between them, acknowledgement, followed by absolute professional indifference as she continued her address. "Today, we've proven that true innovation comes from diverse perspectives. Our ionic propulsion technology is redefining space exploration, and our market valuation exceeded $5 billion this quarter." From his seat, James swallowed hard. Harrison Holdings' current valuation hovered just above $3 billion, a fact widely reported in financial publications. "But my greatest achievement isn't in the skies," Caitlin continued, her voice warming. "It's here on Earth. Please welcome my son, Ethan Johnson, recipient of the Youth Scientific Excellence Award." The teenager who joined her on stage made James physically recoil in his chair. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected his younger self, the same penetrating green eyes, the same defined jawline that had characterized Harrison men for generations. But there was something else there too. Caitlin's confidence, her warmth, her unshakable integrity. "Thank you, Mom," Ethan said, embracing her with obvious pride. "Everything I know about perseverance and excellence, I learned from you." As Ethan delivered his acceptance speech, detailing his groundbreaking work on self-regenerating space habitats, James felt the room spinning around him. This brilliant, articulate, clearly exceptional young man was his son, the son he had ordered eliminated with an envelope of cash 15 years ago. Following the ceremony, James watched helplessly as technology CEOs, renowned scientists, and venture capitalists clustered around Caitlin and Ethan. Even the president of the International Astronautical Federation waited patiently for a moment of the teenager's time, notebook in hand to capture his insights. With trembling hands, James took another sip of whiskey before gathering courage to approach them. "Caitlin," he said, forcing a confident smile, "what an incredible surprise. You look stunning." Caitlin turned slowly, her eyes registering his presence with the same emotion she might show an insignificant insect. "Mr. Harrison, how surprising to find you here," she replied coolly. "I imagine it must be difficult for you to see that the Roxbury Scholarship student who would never be enough now commands more value than your entire family fortune combined." James paled at hearing his own cruel words reflected back. "Caitlin, that was a long time ago. I was young, arrogant. And now you're simply older and arrogant," she completed, as nearby executives pretended not to eavesdrop. "You owe me no explanations, Mr. Harrison. In fact, I owe you gratitude." "Gratitude?" James asked, confusion evident. "Absolutely. Your abandonment was the best thing that could have happened. Without your connections, I had to build my own. Without your money, I had to create my own wealth. Without your name, I had to make mine a symbol of excellence." Ethan, sensing the tension, approached them. "Mom, Dr. Nakamura from JAXA wants to discuss a potential collaboration." "Ethan," James said, unable to contain himself, "I'm James Harrison. I worked with your mother a long time ago." The teenager extended his hand politely. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Harrison. Your company rejected 3 partnership proposals from Celestial last year. I hope you're reconsidering your position on disruptive technologies." James felt the blow of the casual observation. "Actually, Mr. Harrison," Caitlin interrupted, "I'm sure you have many guests to entertain. My son and I have business to discuss with people who understand the future, not just the past." At that moment, Jonathan Wyatt, chairman of the Harrison Holdings board, approached eagerly. "Dr. Johnson, what an honor! I've been trying to schedule a meeting with you for months." "Mr. Wyatt," Caitlin responded warmly, completely ignoring James, "I was just wanting to discuss that acquisition proposal for your satellite division. I believe we can salvage what's left of it before it becomes completely obsolete." James watched, paralyzed, as his own board chairman enthusiastically discussed selling an entire division of Harrison Holdings to the woman he had once deemed unworthy of his world. "Your mother told me you grew up without a father," James said desperately to Ethan when he managed a moment alone with the teenager. Ethan interrupted him with surprising maturity. "Mr. Harrison, my mother taught me that a person's true value lies in what they build, not what they inherit. She built an empire while you merely managed yours. I don't need a father who appears only after the difficult work has been done." As the teenager walked away to rejoin his mother, James felt silent tears marking his impeccably shaved face. Behind him, he overheard an investor comment, "Did you see that Celestial just closed a $1.2 billion contract with NASA? Harrison Holdings is finished if they don't reinvent themselves." Behind James Harrison, the investor's words hung in the air like a death knell. Harrison Holdings is finished if they don't reinvent themselves. The truth of this statement would become painfully evident in the hours and days that followed the Science and Technology Gala. The morning after the gala, James sat motionless at his mahogany desk, staring at the Forbes magazine his assistant had placed before him. Caitlin Johnson's confident gaze met his from the cover. Beneath the headline, "The Star Queen: How a Single Mother Revolutionized Space Exploration." Inside, a small sidebar mentioned Harrison Holdings, among traditional companies struggling to remain relevant in the new technological landscape. The magazine's glossy pages reflected the harsh morning light as James traced Caitlin's features with his fingertip. The scholarly girl from Roxbury had transformed into a formidable force, her eyes no longer seeking approval, but commanding respect. His phone buzzed for the third time that hour. Another board member questioning his leadership after witnessing the stark contrast between Celestial's innovation and Harrison's stagnation. The text from Catherine Worthington, his fiancée from another old Boston family, was even more direct. "Dinner with my parents canceled. We need to talk about what I witnessed last night." The knock on his office door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Jonathan Wyatt entered without waiting for permission, an unprecedented breach of protocol that signaled the shifting power dynamics. "I saw you speaking with Caitlin Johnson last night," Wyatt began, his tone carefully neutral. "You never mentioned you knew her personally. That connection could have been useful in our previous approaches to Celestial." James cleared his throat. "It was a brief relationship during college," he lied, avoiding Wyatt's penetrating gaze. "She suggested something different during our brunch today." Wyatt tossed a folder onto the desk. She explained why she has systematically rejected all partnership proposals from Harrison Holdings over the past years, despite their financial advantages to both companies. "Jonathan, I can explain. The board will meet tomorrow to discuss Harrison Holdings' leadership," Wyatt interrupted coldly. "I suggest you prepare either a compelling defense or a resignation letter." After Wyatt's departure, James sat in the suffocating silence of his office. The empire that had defined 5 generations of Harrisons was crumbling around him, not through market forces or competition, but through his own past actions. Desperate for some control over the spiraling situation, James drove his Bentley to Celestial Innovations' Manhattan headquarters. The gleaming skyscraper seemed to mock the traditional granite edifice that housed Harrison Holdings. Modern, forward-looking, triumphant. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, but Dr. Johnson isn't available," the receptionist informed him with practiced professionalism. "Would you like to schedule a formal meeting with our Strategic Partnerships Department next week?" "I need to see her personally," James insisted, his usual authoritative tone failing him. "It's about Ethan." After 20 minutes of tense waiting in the sleek reception area, James was escorted to a conference room where Caitlin already waited, accompanied by a sharp-eyed woman he recognized as one of New York's most formidable corporate attorneys. "5 minutes, Mr. Harrison," Caitlin stated, consulting her Patek Philippe watch, a timepiece worth more than most people's annual salary. "I have a video conference with Tokyo shortly." "I want to know my son," James declared without preamble. "I have rights." The attorney intervened smoothly. "Actually, Mr. Harrison, you explicitly relinquished any parental rights in December 2007 when you offered money to eliminate the problem and stated verbatim that you didn't want to be dragged down. We have the recording of that conversation." James paled visibly. "You recorded that. I recorded everything from the moment you started treating me as inferior 3 months into our relationship," Caitlin replied calmly. "A black girl from Dorchester learns early to protect herself." "I didn't come here to fight," James insisted, leaning forward. "I came to know Ethan, to offer him the Harrison legacy." Caitlin laughed, a genuinely amused sound. "James, Ethan's net worth at 14 already exceeds yours. The patents he developed last year are worth more than your Beacon Hill building. It's not about money." "It never was," Caitlin agreed, rising from her chair. "It was about power. You believed you had power over me that December night, that you could determine my value, that you could decide whether our child deserved to exist." "I made a terrible mistake," James admitted, tears forming in his eyes. "Yes, you did," Caitlin acknowledged. "And now, 15 years later, you want to reap the benefits of a tree you didn't plant, water, or protect during storms. Ethan has known who you are since he was 10. I showed him your picture, told him the true story. No dramatization, just facts. And he hates me." "There's your arrogance again," Caitlin observed. "Ethan doesn't hate you. That would require you to be important in his life. He simply doesn't care. You're a footnote in his story." As Caitlin moved toward the door, James made one final attempt. "What can I do to fix this?" She paused, regarding him with something approaching compassion. "Nothing, James. That's your final punishment. There is nothing you can do. I don't need your money. Ethan doesn't need your name. We've built a life that has no space for you." 1 week later, the Harrison Holdings board voted to replace James with an external CEO specializing in digital transformation. Catherine canceled their engagement after discovering he had hidden a child for 15 years. The Boston Globe published a feature detailing how Dr. Johnson's inspiring journey included overcoming abandonment by Harrison family heir. In his empty Beacon Hill apartment, James watched December snow falling, identical to that night 15 years earlier. On his desk, the latest edition of MIT Technology Review featured Ethan Johnson as the future of space science. Beside it lay a letter from his attorney informing him that Caitlin had declined his substantial donation offer to her educational foundation. The attached message was simple: "Thank you, but the Johnson Foundation is already fully funded. I suggest donating to underprivileged students from Roxbury. They need it more than we do." Meanwhile, in Celestial Innovations' private laboratory, Caitlin watched Ethan completing calculations for his latest innovation. The monitor displayed a message from MIT offering him early admission. "Do you think I made the right choice, Mom?" Ethan asked, rejecting any contact with him. Caitlin embraced her son. "It's not about rejection, Ethan. It's about value. You don't owe your time to someone who didn't value your existence." "I feel sorry for him," the teenager admitted. "He missed the chance to know us." "That was his choice," Caitlin replied softly. "And every day since then has been our victory." Across the city, James Harrison picked up the last family portrait of the Harrisons, dated 1887. For generations, his family had accumulated power and influence, always following rigid rules about who belonged in their exclusive world. Now he understood the bitter truth. Real power had never been in his name or money, but in the ability to build something meaningful. And in rejecting Caitlin and Ethan, he had discarded the only chance to create a legacy that would truly matter. The snow continued to fall over Boston, covering equally the mansions of Beacon Hill and the renovated buildings of Roxbury, indifferent to human divisions of worth and belonging that, in the end, proved utterly empty. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen